Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics that write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, an entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs, and currently I'm teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. Let's welcome today's guest, Dr. Shanda Gore, author of the book, The PinLeader Path: Identify, Engage, and Develop Effective Human and AI Leadership for Your Organizational Culture. Shanda, welcome.
Thank you very much.
So it's a pleasure to have you. So before we jump into the book, why don't you tell us your professional path about how you got to where you're at right now?
So my doctorate's actually in leadership, specifically, and I have a bachelor's in communications and a master's in communications. And I start off in corporate and media, and then I moved into higher education, and I spent about 14 years in higher education, working with in various capacities, but a lot of entrepreneurship and a number of opportunities. I started an incubator. We had about $46 million in gross sales from those that graduated out. And what I was seeing is that a great need for business consulting and understanding and leadership development, strategic planning, how to pivot, and then going into this whole piece about culture building, how to recruit and retain the best workforce possible. And as I was doing this, I actually concepted 20 years ago with the PinLeader concept, and I realized my most exceptional leaders were sharp in experience and education. They were very knowledgeable, with straightforward with a plan, with the ability to pivot when they needed to. And then they had strength of character, and people want to follow people they can trust. And so those attributes led me into the book, and we became a number one bestseller for that in HR and personnel management when it came out in 2025. And it's been 25,000th individual and through our trainings and workshops, and it is just still going. We have to have these conversations about the impact and what it looks like to have a strong culture and how AI plays into it.
What made you write this book?
Sheer need. It got to the point where I had been writing and concepting it, and I just said, I've got enough information because there's a number of case studies that are actually in the book, and I wanted to help leaders get to over to the other side of some of the decision making, understanding and recognizing self awareness, as well as if there's individuals within the organization that need that professional development. If they don't, they themselves need it. There's this lifelong learning. But if you've got someone in your organization, maybe they're toxic or creating a hostile work environment, we need to address those, because you have a number of individuals that are great within your organization, and we need to create a good work environment for everyone, because great people have choices on where they want to work.
Yeah, we were talking about that before, about these companies letting folks go, or companies that don't um, reward risk, that as soon as you make a mistake, you're done. And so really smart people want to take risk. And if they can't take that, and they know that they have a very short runway to try things, they just walk away and find an organization that rewards that kind of risk taking. So absolutely. So let's start out with chapter one, the PinLeader Path. You use the metaphor of a pin to describe leadership. What inspired that, and why does it resonate so strongly?
I think because of the exceptional leadership component, again, in my experiences, I've worked with executives. I've worked with frontline. I've worked with custodial groups. I've worked across, and there is this it doesn't matter what industry, and because the book is really over 20 industries under the review, but it doesn't matter. There is these elements that truly show for that exceptional leader. And I talked about sharp and strength of character and straightforward with ability to pivot. But that in that chapter one, I set up the premise of understanding there are also the three C's, that care and communication and how you're delivering it and the civility behind it. Those are your three C's when you're building good culture. So I found that we needed to have this in a place where you could read it and know either reinforcement of something that you're already doing or address it within your own. If you're wondering, why are people leaving? How can I recruit a great workforce? This sets you up to understand and to self-reflect.
When leaders first hear about the uh, three core elements, why do they usually realize they're weakest? Where do they realize where they're weakest?
Well, depending on who I had in front of me on my own podcast, the PinLeader Path, PinLeader podcast, we talk about this, and every time my leaders say something different about like what how they rank the three elements. Some of them say strength of character first and foremost. You need to have strength of character to lead. Others will say you better be straightforward with the individuals that are in front of you because and build trust with them, understanding and have the ability to pivot. And then I've had people saying, well, to be a strong leader, you need to have the experience and education, or you can't build the credibility. So I, each of my leaders take those three elements of the pen differently, see it differently, and it's not really one consensus. Like one feels that one is stronger than the other. It's sometimes it depends on where they are in the season of their leadership.
You talk about how you talk about leaders holding the fabric together. What does that look like in a real organization today, especially with what AI is doing?
So I talk about like tough as leather, and those are the ones that uh, we've been doing it the same way all this time. It's working for us. Why would we make any changes? That is that tough as leather, but they're strong and they're a department or an area that you can count on, right? That's one culture. Within an organization, we need to recognize that the toughest leather, the silk, smooth, the cotton, breathable as cotton, the wool, these are different elements within one organization. If you can become aware that you have different cultures, different departments have different cultures, that will help you. You're already through the first hurdle. Because if you have an expectation that no, we're one big vision, mission, organization, and you don't understand that there's pockets with their own cultures within it, you're selling yourself short in your organization, and it will probably alienate some of your staff. There are individuals, and we all have been there, where you've come into an organization and now you're in this particular, maybe it's the accounting department, maybe it's the HR department, maybe whatever the department is. Each one of them have elements that have this fabric, and how they operate. They may operate very well in their goals and actions that they have to complete for the organization, but you need to understand how they work because we have people involved here. They're not robots, they're people. And then when you play an AI, people have this other, well, they're not a team member. I don't know why you're talking about them as a potential team member. Not only are they a team member, but they also could be a leader. And this is where in the book I talk about AI as a leader. If you're taking direction from AI, you're allowing it to lead you into whatever path or goal that is. If you're relying on it that way, we need to recognize them as that element, that bot or agent, as a leader as well as a team member.
How should someone assess where they are right now in the pin leader path?
First step is self-awareness. You need to sit down and really carefully look at your organization and see what part do you play in it. Are you a pin follower? Are you being led by another pin leader? Is there someone that you're aspiring to be like? What's that look like? If the person is there and uh, you see some attributes that you don't like maybe you're looking at them and saying, this is not who I want to be, they're still leading you in a pathway of like, again, I could recognize. So the more self-awareness we can get, the better we will be. And typically, statistically, as the academic comes out of me, we have a higher self-rater uh, bias that we think we're more self-aware than we are. And so taking a step back, reviewing where we are, how are we reacting? understanding what our triggers are, especially with emotional intelligence. I talk about those four intelligences that are really focused on exceptional leaders, actually in my book. And the first one is emotional intelligence. The next one is intrapersonal communication. So understanding like what's going on internally with yourself, and then interpersonal with those, how you're interacting with those outside of yourself, and then how are you leveraging AI, artificial intelligence.
How important is emotional IQ today?
I think it's even more important. Can you, if you can even think that it can be even more? And I think the more we lean on technology, I I think this is one of those traits that it's not a soft skill to be able to have that interaction and emotional intelligence. It is definitely a hard skill to have, and knowing how you react to something. Uh, are you going to react emotionally to something when someone's brought to you? There are people that maybe on teams, and many leaders know this or they've seen this at maybe at the table. There are individuals who I would say pick on other people, but they know where their triggers are, and they just go in. And so if you allow that, and you're not realizing that this is a trigger for you, the lack of self-awareness, you need to be able to do it, because not only is it's lives can be on the line depending on where you work, what you're doing. I think I take my husband as an example. He's a retired fireman of 29 years. It's life and death every day. So he's going in and he cannot make emotional decisions. He has to understand procedures as well. And so there's a balance of understanding when you're going in. Everybody else might be emotional, but you can't go along with that emotional train. You have to be the calm, level headed person to be able to guide people out of the building, out of this circumstance, whatever that is. It may be the worst time of your life. But there's a great example of someone who you need that emotional intelligence even more than ever.
Yeah, I think that's probably maybe the most important skill to have. In chapter two, Pin Leader Sharp, when you say a leader needs to be sharp, what does that really mean beyond just being smart?
So my most exceptional leaders, the ones who are leading and have individuals that will follow them wherever they go, they are sharp, meaning they have the experience and they don't flaunt the experience. The experience comes out in how they demonstrate through their actions, which is powerful, because you don't always need to brag on yourself. Others will do it for you when you're doing the work well. You don't need to chase the rewards, but there are also times to sit back and make sure you're self reflecting. And the sharpest leaders keep making themselves sharper. They know when they're starting to get dull, meaning they don't have the latest and greatest information. So they seek out information so they can stay sharp. My sharpest, most exceptional leaders are reading not just from one source of information or listening to one area, but they've got a source, a number of sources. I just interviewed someone who is part of the Aspen 40, Apollo 40, and they're reading more than 7 or 8 sources before they even start their day. And they're intentional about it, about making sure they have different points of view. And I think that variance in points of view that makes my leaders so sharp, because then they're not as surprised when an economic downturn happens, or so very rarely do they get too caught off guard. They're prepared.
How does dullness show up in leadership without people realizing it?
Oh, I think about meetings that I've sat in where someone is using an example that they have like a younger workforce around them, and they're using something that maybe it's from a TV show. They're using a metaphor or a story, and none of the individuals at the table know who they're talking about. They're like, who is that person? What show are they talking about? They're so out of touch with their workforce or with those that are around, or maybe colleagues. They don't know what the latest trends are happening. They're not led by the trends, they're just aware of the trends. And they can have a conversation and communicate with someone who may be a different generation. I think it's important to understand the different generational components of different workforce individuals. I myself, I keep myself fresh with, I talk with students quite a bit on what languages they're using, what's important to them, because I know that they're the next generation, and potentially, if they're coming out of college, of workforce, and how do you recruit them successfully and how do you keep them retained? So I'm always looking at it from attempting as much as I can through the lens that I have, knowing that I already have a bias because I was raised in a different generation. I'm at least am aware, and that I'm purposefully going and seeking out a different source.
Yeah, I find the same thing. Because I teach at a university, it allows me to stay current with everything. And the biggest concern I hear from my students is work-life balance. And I
Yes.
said, I don't know if that's even possible. I said, because you're in a different era. When I graduated college in 82, which was like prehistoric times, no
No, it's
laptops and any of those things. I said you were competing with everybody on a local basis, and then it became on a regional basis. Then became because of internet, national, and now international. I said so. The competition is enormous, and now AI. You're competing against other people. You're competing against AI, and there's more pressure on companies to produce results. And because you can work 24/7 and it doesn't shut off, I said, I don't think there is. I think if you only have to work 50 hours in a week, consider yourself lucky because it's not just the company wants you to work beyond 50, it's that it's survival. I really don't know anybody who can work less than 50 hours a week in most cases in the business world, not talking about like a surgeon or something like that, because of the enormous competition. Even McKinsey is finding out now that uh, that companies only want the senior partners and senior consultants to work on their projects because they're using AI to do all the grunt work that you used to have people right out of college doing. So they're saying, well, I don't need to spend 100,000 a month with you to have this army of people. Here's all the results that the virtual assistants in the Philippines did for us, and now I need you to interpret that.
That's interesting you say that. I Let me float another concept. I'm not sure work life balance existed even before. I had
Yeah.
a guest on, actually a very successful boutique lawyer with
Mhm.
a large firm. And he said, it's really about work life integration. Because think about it, I'm driving my car, I'm driving a car somewhere, I'm thinking about my clients. I'm thinking about, okay, yep, I just have, I'm driving and I'm successful in driving, but I'm also thinking about that next time I hear something on the radio, I might hear something in a podcast I'm listening to, or book, an audiobook I'm listening to. So I'm still in a way working because I'm thinking, oh, that's an element I'd like to use. That makes a lot of sense. I want to make sure to say this to my client when I talk with them. I could be talking to my husband, who is actually an advisor in our firm as well on with public servant information and military, has a military background as well. And we're just talking, but we're having our time, but we're actually talking about the next step, and that's integration. That's not balance at all.
No, and everybody is looking for more, more, more because they're under so much pressure. And this is just what life is today around the world, not just in the United States, where we've always worked long hours. A lot of people would come to the U.S. and move back. Especially, I worked in Latin America, and they were like, "There's no family life here. You're working all the time." And then they would move back to those countries. But now, just like France and others are finding that it's impossible to have that 35-hour actual work week and be able to compete with other countries. Even the Midwest people used to work till 5:30, and only if they moved to the East Coast did they actually have to work later. but now they're finding again, you're competing with the whole world, so survival requires you to work these kinds of hours. You introduced the idea of multiple intelligence. Which one do leaders often neglect?
I'd have to admit, again, I'm going to take artificial intelligence off the table right now temporarily because the fact of the matter is artificial intelligence, there are leaders still learning on what they're doing with it, and they're not neglecting it. I just don't think they're in the know enough to how to use it. So I want to take that because it's not fair. It's still emerging. Okay. The ones that have been around for a while, there are leaders who, and I wouldn't say they're good leaders. The poorest leaders have ignored emotional intelligence because they in fact some of them leverage it as I'm passionate about what I do, so that's why I yell at my staff. They just totally ignore the importance of understanding when to check it.
Yep.
Interpersonal, some of them, I don't want to build relationships. I don't have time for those things. That happens. But one of the ones that I think that the most exceptional leaders sometimes they can get challenged on is the intrapersonal. That it takes time to slow down, take time for yourself to review. I've got leaders right now that they're challenged to spend 15 minutes in the morning to do some self reflection. They're like, I don't have time for self reflection. But if you don't listen to that intrapersonal, that voice, they are on their pathway to burnout. They can't sleep, and they don't realize why. And so it goes into this a health challenge. You hear of individuals that are very successful, but they have heart attacks in their 50s, not putting aside something that's a family history, but something that's driven from stress or anxiety or not being able to recognize that you are burning your light out. That's what I find, and it's because they get excited about the next challenge. Some people are driven based on the excitement of what's the next challenge, what's over the next hill, and you have to recognize to pace yourself. Not all of your staff can keep up with you, so you need to understand where your boundaries are, and that takes an intrapersonal approach.
Yeah, I agree with you totally about that. What daily habits help someone stay sharp over time?
Hmm. So I mentioned a couple of them, but I want to really lean into this. If you can take time, and it used to be Franklin Covey used to drive this for those that
I used to,
remember
yeah,
Franklin Covey.
yeah, I read this. Yeah, it's dating us.
Yeah, see, there you go. So for my students who are like, Dr. Gore, I don't know what that is, but it's those priority in the ABC and your prior that still has an element of intentionality that you need to do before you start your day. I have individuals who reconcile at the end of the week. Okay. But where are you? What are your goals for that day? What are you going to get completed? Do you have a task list that's like 15 to 20 things long? And for those that are like, again, not everybody may be on camera, but you may know who you are out there, that you have a task list and you don't get through all of it. I used to have a task list for the day. And what I found is that no, I need a task list for the week. And then knowing that I'm going to part out those actions during the week. Maybe I get one or two, maybe three things done because I'm doing work life integration on Monday, as my Monday's going along. But there may be a few things that can flow into Tuesday and Wednesday. But I do not lock myself into a corner. I understand how to say no, not now, or this isn't the right time, and to be able to do that. Not everything needs to be done yesterday. I have my company, my firm has divisions in publishing. So I have a publishing division and I have a studio side for the podcast. But not all of it's going to get my attention right away. I have great workforce that's in each one of those areas. So I don't need to know everything at all the time and have them as part of my task. You are leaving money on the table when you don't do this because that means you're not being as efficient as you could be. And the worst leaders I've seen are the ones that say, I know everything about everybody's job and I can do their job better than they can do it themselves. And you may know people like this or have seen them. There's
Yes.
nothing worse than seeing a CEO in front of you or a president say, I know that job, I did that job, and I can do it better than it. Stop doing that job. You're now the president. Do your job.
Right. Absolutely. Uh, Chapter 3, straight to the point. Why is being direct such a challenge for so many leaders? And I wonder if we're just talking about the US or we're talking about the world, because in Asia, people aren't as direct as we are, especially even in our country. I'm from the Northeast region of the country, and we're very direct.
Mm-hmm. Think you need to understand the culture that you're working in and those that are part of that culture that may be coming into your organization. From where you're sitting, Mark, even having direct eye contact with someone could be seen as being aggressive toward a confrontational potentially. And so you need to understand the body language. Nonverbals have been one of those pieces that I work with my exceptional leaders to make sure they are mindful of them. How how they deliver a message is actually even more important than the message itself. I've had, when you talk about nonverbals, 93% of a message is delivered nonverbally. I can say, I care about you. I hope that you're having a great weekend. But my nonverbals are not actually even confirming what I that I really mean what I'm saying. So being straightforward is probably one of the most difficult challenges because that means that you have to be as transparent as you can be with whatever the plan is. I talk about strategic plan. There are companies that are really running right now. They don't have a strategic plan. And they're like, well, we've functioned like this for the last 20 years. We don't have a strategic plan. We're doing just fine. Are you? You know what your goals are? I don't believe that you don't have some kind of goal set. And if you have stockholders, you're going to have a plan. You got to have a plan because you have other individuals who are going to hold you to that because their stocks are impacted. So it's really important to understand your audience and that being straightforward and having the ability to pivot when you need to. Unfortunately, some individuals don't pivot in time and their
Just
company
like,
organizations fail.
yeah, look at all the organizations that were brand names in during my lifetime, from Sears to Radio Shack to Blockbuster, Kodak. These were global names that don't exist anymore,
They
or
don't.
exist in a very, very small way.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
people basically say, "Hey, why fix it when it's not broke?" How many times have you heard that?
we're doing just fine. We're doing
Yeah.
just fine. Roebuck, Sears Roebuck is a great example. Everyone at one point in the United States, almost every home had a catalog.
Yes.
Sears, right?
Yeah, I talk about all the time in class. How did somebody who had 100-year head start over Amazon, and everything was already in place, warehouses, stores, everything was in place, and they not end up with that business?
Someone along the line, along with a group of others who were the thought leaders, said that's a passing phase over there. Yeah,
Right.
they're
Yes.
that's passing phase. We have there people will always order. They want hard copy. I talk to, especially in the book publishing side, I talk to individuals. It's great that you have a book, that you see your book in Barnes and Noble and Books a Million, which I'm in. I see my book, but you're also going to find me in audio. I have an audio book. You're also going to find me electronically because I understand my audience. They're on the go. They may not have time to read a book, a physical book. And there's to make sure that you diversify and understand the audience that you have in front of you. That takes thought leadership that understands the internet. I mean, that's the reason why Amazon understood how to leverage that and ordering online and convenience. And that's really what was the downfall. And once you say that's a passing phase, if you don't have someone exploring that area and you turn all your attention to just these one or two areas and that's it, that is the beginning of the end.
Yeah, how many people told Henry Ford that it was the horse that was going to be in, that cars were never going to amount to anything? And Ivan met with a venture capitalist when the internet got started, and they thought that was just a phase.
The phase is the probably the most deadliest uh, phrase to use is it's a phase. There's also some interesting about Ford. You can dive down deeper in that about their electronic car and how that they created. I think it was 1,600 of them. Let people have them, drive around. They loved them, but then they pulled them all back and destroyed all but like five, crushed them out. That's a fascinating story about Ford. So it's like, well, they're just now catching on. No, they had electric cars. But the question is how the market, how did you leverage the market to be able to say we're gonna commit? Can you imagine Ford right now had they stayed and kept that whole division of electric vehicles? We would be
Yeah,
so much further.
yeah, and you hear and say that, see this all the time. You know, I had a student of mine do a report on Blockbuster, and I didn't even know this, that Blockbuster was making $1 billion a year in late fees. And so when Netflix said, "Hey, we could eliminate net late fees by people being able to download their movie selection," these guys were laughing and saying, "Well, that's just crazy."
We don't see a sustainable long tail opportunity here because we count on our late fees. Banks were the same way. Remember late fees with there's fees they still have, but there was a point where libraries have gotten rid of late fees. We have a large public library here, and they don't do late fees on books anymore. It's too cumbersome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Um, what happens to teams when leaders aren't clear and straightforward?
Oh, um, the most frustrating team is a lost team and a leader who doesn't know how to lead and leverage their team, the teammates. I mentioned about the one leader who comes in and says, I know everything. I know your job, your job, your job, your job, your job. So they micromanage the team, each of the team members, which makes great leaders that are especially pin followers who are up and coming, the next generation, they have places to go. You will drive a great team apart if you don't lead with some level of decisiveness. I just actually was just meeting with a client before I got on here, and we were talking about a what a deadline truly is. And they hadn't set a deadline, and I said, "Well, why not?" Well, I just want to make sure that given the latitude, don't you have a deadline? How are you meeting your deadline if you don't provide a deadline? There needs to be an expectation. There's something said about, well, we can kind of soft moonwalk into this backward walk. No, be direct, set the expectation. There's got to be a level, there's responsibility and there's accountability, and those are two different things. You are responsible, but there's an accountability. Someone has to be accountable for making that goal. And so leaders that set that accountability and responsibility identifies the agents, they're the most exceptional teams and they're the most productive.
In chapter 4, you redefine strength as more than toughness. How should leaders think about strength today?
So that ties into also my chapter 1 where I talk about the power of empathy. There's nothing worse than having someone stand up and say, empathy is not for me, that's for the weak. You will lose your workforce faster than your head can spin. I can say this that empathy, those leaders that demonstrate empathy with their workforce, they build trust, they have credibility, And when the time is tough, when the times are tough, a workforce will follow a leader who has a level of empathy or has demonstrated it, and will tolerate the tough times better than if somebody who's showing that you must not care about me and you must not care about the work that I do, and they will sandblast them right out of the organization. It, it's funny. I've had individuals reward for longevity, where this person's been with us for 35 or 40 years. There's those that are actually they're great workers and they believe and they're passionate and they're loyal. That's one thing. But there's also individuals who've been with your organization a long time because they themselves are so poorly part of the organization that they have no other place to go. And so you have to really be mindful of, like, why do people stay? Is it because we are engaging them? We're creating professional development opportunities. Do they see a growth line? Are they interested in it? There's this one thing about talking about the golden rule, do unto others as you want them to do unto you. And I say, no, it's the platinum rule, which why don't you do unto others how they ask you to do unto them? This is what I'm looking for. It's a relationship. That's a hard concept. It's not about top down forcing. It's about how do we build a relationship so that you hear me and I'm trying to help this organization move forward. There's nothing more frustrating than people with great ideas and concepts that say, well, if you won't listen to me, that's all right. I'll take my idea over here. And you miss out. And we've just talked about some real train wreck uh, situations that occurred, that hurt generationally within an organization. But if you're new and you're starting out and you're a sole proprietor, it's a whole other discussion. You need to find individuals that can share your vision and help you support it and build the credibility, because people who believe and have trust will follow you even when it's hard times.
How does fragility show up in leadership roles?
Oh, the most fragile personalities are is the egos. I talk about personality constructs. I did a lot. I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but I find myself sitting with individuals that are having moments where their egos are so fragile that I'm doing surveys with them, and you know what they're asking? They're not asking me what people think of the organization or how well. They want to know if people are talking about them. Well, did the survey reveal anything about me? What do they say about me? How do they think I look in the organization? Do they see me as a leader? I'm like, is the survey about you or is the survey about the organization to help it go to the next level? And we all know those personalities. So
And
that,
don't you wonder how they got to those levels? Like there are times we meet leaders and I see it all the time and I'm wondering, how did that person rise to that position? It just seems unbelievable that they're like either incompetent. I was in a meeting with somebody and he always states the obvious. And it was driving me nuts. I finally said something to him and our boss was like giving me the thumbs up behind him. Uh, Saying, yeah, I'm so glad you said something to him. But I thought, that's just ridiculous. I can't handle that.
well, it's also repeating your resume. If you've got to go through, and there's one thing about talking about yourself, but every time you go in a meeting, you got to talk about yourself and why you know what you know and how you got where you got, and over and over and over again. It gets to the point where that's fragile. That is also a dangerous leader, too, because that means that they will make a decision based on what they perceive how people see them. And that's not the best for the organization.
What are the most common ineffective leadership types you've seen?
Well, I just mentioned the one where we're so wrapped up in ego that we can't see the forest for the trees. Individuals who surround themselves with yes people, that they don't challenge them at all. And there, let me just say this: there are respectful ways of challenging. So I'm not talking about the aggressive person who says the leader says one thing and they're always, no, that's not right, or no, that's not what I'm talking. I'm talking about challenging an idea. You put a concept on the table, or maybe a theory, or maybe it could be a product line, depending on what industry you're in, and you are gauging what those individuals think of that. Allowing the space for allowing them to say, these are all of things that I think are the positives, and these are the challenges. Even driving that conversation in that way. Tell me what you like about it. Now tell me what you don't. And then make sure you have the why. Tell me why. Is it based on research? Is it based on a gut feeling? Why? And allowing the space for that. The worst leaders are the ones that don't allow for that at anything. They already know, I'm going to tell you what to do. This is how we're going to do it. Uh, and it's really more of a security thing, as it's a lack of confidence. Uh, there's nothing worse than a martyr as well. That's another one that I see. But people who are saying, well, I was up at 4 in the morning working on this project, and then somebody else says, yeah, well, I was up at 3:30 in the morning. And this is what? Very
And they
competitive.
have to top the other person. Why is it so important for leaders to understand their own profile?
Mm. Because then it gives them an ability to work on the areas that they know they're a challenge. Every one of us, because we're human beings, we all have faults, and we have areas that we all could be working on. Every one of us. Every one of us. I used to say everyone has biases, every one of us. And the most dangerous person is the person who'll stand up and say, I don't have any biases. I've actually heard that one. And I don't have I've mastered those areas. So I'm not sure why we're going over this. Those are the ones that don't have the reflection ability. And so I know I'm IDI certified, and I even put myself on a continuum. There's a continuum of just seeing how that self rater is. And I noticed I had some biases, actually, in some areas that I needed to address because I hadn't really done enough reading or experience in an area. So I went and I did an immersive experience, actually traveled and did an immersion so that I could work on them, so that so I could be a better self to help my clients.
You mentioned the idea of a non-human leaders, and we've been talking about that throughout this conversation. How real is that future?
Oh, it's happening right now. It's interesting because when I wrote the book, I concentrated on the last 2 years, and at the time, I put some in the book. I put some phrases of how you ask whatever bot or agent that you're interacting with, and I gave some examples of allowing a bot to analyze me, and what they thought of me. And I said at the time, it is it was more of an adolescent. It's almost like if you've ever had children, it's like I know if my son comes and he says, Mom, you look great today. You're fantastic. I tell you how much I love you. I know that on the other side of that, there's something he wants, and he wants the car keys. I'm being real.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
I'm waiting for that. And I'm like, oh, I love that. Thank you. Well, it's the same with the bots. The bots will tell you, in many ways, what you want to hear. Now, it's interesting. In the last couple of months, I'm noticing there's some pushback, and bots are allowing you to correct them. So there's been times when they say, I said, no, I don't believe that to be true. You need to go look here, here, and here. And I've educated a bot as I built this relationship with the bot to go find and dive down deeper. And now they say things like, you're right, Dr. Gore. Because now it even calls me by my name. Before it could never get me straight, but now it knows my name. And so as you have this bot that is learning more about your company and organization, it's learning as long as it has its memory turned on. So for those that are doing that and they have its memory turned on, the more it understands you and your organization, it can make better decisions. What I would say is that there are organizations right now, which I would not advise you to do this. So let me be very clear. They've turned over all of their strategic plan to AI. Spit me out go learn about my company, which is whatever is online, whatever you feed it, which also has biases in it, may have false information, and then spit out a strategic plan for me. Just know that AI is probably going to optimize to the most. It's going to assume a few things like you want to make the most money, you want to be able to. AI will drive you to the point where it's not even humanly possible because it's going to say, well, you want to make the most money. That's your goal, right? So if it doesn't understand the nuances of the work life integration that's happening, it's going to give you what it thinks that you want to see. And so I'm very careful. Sure, you could start there, but you need to have especially with boards, staff, those that have to fulfill whatever the goals and actions items are. You need to make sure you don't go by what just AI tells you, but you need to still check and balance it.
Um, in chapter 6, the push, you talk about who's holding the pin. Why is that a critical question?
Oh, so um, this really comes down to what motivates you. What's pushing you to go to the next level? I know me as an individual, I'm first generation college graduate, first doctor in my family in the area. And actually, to the point that when I got my doctorate, people wanted to know if I wrote scripts or not even understanding there were different types of doctors in the world because all they knew were medical doctors. All right. So it's the experience of that. And so when you talk about what's pushing, what motivates me is I'm motivated by a long list of individuals who came before me, my parents who thought education was the number one step for any progression, that you need to make sure you're always constantly educating yourself. And so I drove myself to do that work to get there. I would say that if you're looking and you've got somebody else pushing you, or maybe it could be something if it's not your past, it's somebody else that wants you to do whatever you need to do. The pen, if you think of it as the metaphor, again, you're the pen. If you've got someone who's constantly pushing you into fabric, maybe it's into a culture that's not working, and maybe you're a little dull. Imagine you're driving into tough as leather. You're going to bend, you're going to break, you may not recover from it. And so it's really important for understanding who's pushing you, what's your passion, and then who are others who are pushing you into that direction. You've got to agree with whatever push is coming, that this is something that I'm going to drive into. I, those are your choices. You are still empowered to be able to make those choices, but you've got to recognize there's some force pushing you uh, to do whatever your next action is.
Um, how should organizations think about balancing human and AI leadership?
And here goes that balancing again. I think we're talking about integration. The most successful leaders I have that I've interviewed concerning how they're working AI into their organizations are the leaders that give examples of missed opportunities when they didn't use it, especially with teams that are resistant to using it, and then building good, solid policies so that you know where the boundaries are on using AI. The leaders that take the time to figure out what are the best bots or agents, not based on popularity or what they see or what maybe is being pushed out in some kind of algorithm to sell them a bot, but you need to know, what am I using this bot or agent to do? Is it research? Is it coding? Is it to maybe counter another bot that could be malware that's trying to get into your systems? Having a solid relationship with your IT department to identify those bots. Some leaders don't even think about their IT department. They ask them. I'm like, what? You want to go to your IT department? You want to have conversations with your HR department, who might be screening applicants based on an AI algorithm to select through resumes because maybe they see it as, I don't have time to look at these resumes. What if the resume is completely written by AI? So now it's got the best wording in it, but then you put someone in front of you, and this has happened. They don't even reflect what's on their AI generated resume, but the AI agent they use to screen recognizes as a great person. So they're using the same algorithm. And so now you've got someone who's not qualified sitting in front of you, all because you had AI screening AI.
I just read in the Wall Street Journal that's an enormous problem right now.
Of course it is. I work with so many HR departments, and there's a balance that they'll say balance. I said, no, it's going to be an integration for you. You're going to need to make sure that you're not just relying on AI to screen, but you're going to need to be able to take a look and have conversation. This skill to interact with someone, especially if it's in sales, I can't tell you, you need to be able to build relationships. Relationships, people's, that is a commodity. Time and how and the ability to be able to build good relationships are going to be solid currency for the next generation.
Has that been a big problem with HR that they actually meet these candidates and find out that chat or AI has so enhanced the resume that they don't live up to what they thought they were going to be hiring?
Yes. And unfortunately, some students that are coming out of college, they've used AI to write their resumes, and the resume may, unfortunately, might lean them into where they might have more experience than they do, and it's not found out until you do an interview with the individual. I remember when it used to be required. I don't know if you remember this, Mark, but they used in person. At least one interview had to be in person, and
Oh,
and
of
then
course. Yeah.
in person. Then it moved. Let's do Zoom because of just COVID did a lot with that. We'll do it via Zoom, and but panel interviewing, even going through the process of going through a panel interview. I used to prepare students that way. You need to be able to come in and talk and connect with each one of those panelists. And that is a skill you need to work on. And so imagine you've got this wonderful resume that doesn't reflect. I've literally seen HR professionals go and then look up and say, so you said that you did this, and the person cannot answer fully on their experience that they noted. They got in the door, but it's very obvious that they're not going to go to the next round. And that's time consuming because someone who is probably really great out there, you miss the opportunity to talk to them. So it's important to vet it.
Yeah, companies have been using software to eliminate people, not to find the right person, but to eliminate as many resumes as possible because it's so overwhelming, the hiring process. And to a certain extent, I get it from when I've put out, looking for someone and getting a couple hundred resumes. And now you're just looking through them and seeing which ones you can eliminate by the fact that they had a typo or whatever. So, there needs to be a better system. I had a classmate in my graduate school that she had been working in a job that she had applied for 3 months, and they sent her a letter saying that she wasn't qualified for the job. The system did. And she'd already been working in the job for 3 months at the company. Um, in chapter 7, culture and organizational fabric, how do you define culture in a way leaders can actually act on?
You know, there if you're leading, and remember, I talk about with departments, cultures within a culture, right? So you've got a situation where a leader, you want the best pin for that particular culture. Think of it as a number of pieces of fabric. And I do this exercise with individuals and I say, well, bring all the fabric together. And they'll take a pen, and some get creative. They'll take one pen and they'll stab it through all of the material, and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And they're sitting there and they're spinning the fabric on there. And they're saying, see, I got it. I got it done, Dr. Gore. And I'm like, you did it very fast. And you got one pin. I said, but what if that pin gets in an accident or something happens to that pin? So there's one pin holding all this fabric together. It falls apart. Your goal should be to have a number of pins and have a bench that's deep enough, for my football or sports folks, that if something, you can go on vacation, that you can have a life that's outside, and that the place doesn't fall apart when you're going. I know individuals who crave the fact that they go on vacation and people desperately need them, that things are on hold while they're gone. That's not for the best of the organization. That's a need within one individual who feels that they need. It goes to that martyrdom thing. It's not bragging rights. It's not what you want. You should be thinking when you're going into an organization, when you see is succession planning from day one. Who's here? Who can I train up? Who can learn? Not because you've got an ego that's so fragile that you're like, well, they'll just push me out of the way and they'll replace me. You just mentioned the fact that they've got senior leaders looking at from an AI component. So I'm like, I you have to understand what you're going into and understand the personalities that are going and being led in there. You need a pen that's confident, that is not threatened by the next generation, that are coming up that they're supposed to be mentoring. I've seen bad mentoring. It doesn't look good.
Absolutely. What's a real world example of a leader pushing too hard and missing the mark?
Mm. I think of the leader that pushed so hard that they lied to their board. They actually had an agreement with staff and then talk with them and like, okay, we're going to go in this way. But then when the board started to really um, push on them for answers, they flat out lied and put it. And then the individuals that were there, I've seen. And when you once you lie, you lose the confidence, the credibility of those around you. There are a lot of people. There's an old saying, "Thief and a liar go hand in hand." And I've seen, unfortunately, that because if they're going to lie, blatantly lie, you can't trust them. And so they lose your good, solid team won't never look at you the same way. And they will question you. And especially if you lie on the backs of that team member. So that's when I've seen it pushed too far. Also, people taking a lot of health days, wellness days, uh, getting sick frequently. That means they're burning themselves out. They haven't taken a vacation in 5 years. What's that about? Why is that? So those are signs and symptoms of individuals who are they're pushing themselves, if they won't allow other people to take vacations. Seen that too.
So let's end this with a question about you as a leader. When people who worked under your leadership talk about you 10 years from now, what do you hope that they say you taught them that had nothing to do with business? And I would think that a lot of leaders hope that they have that kind of impact.
Um, I have a uh, I have a value system that everyone signs on when they work for me, and it has the first one has to do with respect. What I would want them to feel is that I've always respected their boundaries, their space, their thoughts, what they bring to the table. That I had the integrity to say no when it doesn't reflect who we are as a company, and that I'm not going to ask them to do something that would put their own integrity at risk. In my line of work, others rely on me to help guide them, especially if they have a toxic work environment. They want me to work with someone. I, if I can't fulfill that myself, then how can I help others get to the next level? I'm all about growth, but in a sustainable way. There's bad growth, grabbing for everything that's bright and shiny. And I talk about the bright and shiny pen in my book. That's not the way you want to run business. That's not how I want to be seen. I want them to feel good about that they work for me and around me. And I want them to be able to call me, or if I were to ever pass away one day, that they would feel good like they knew me as a person, as a human being.
Well, I think we've gotten a chance to know you in the hour that's gone by super fast. I so appreciate the time you've spent with us. I look forward to connecting with you and
Yes.
participating in your own show.
Yes.
I think your book does a great job, especially for young people who really want to understand leadership and what they need to do to lead in the AI era. So I thank you again for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I've enjoyed it, and I look forward to speaking to you in the future.
Thank you so much, everyone. I look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great rest of your weekend.